All right. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Blake Woodward. I'm Senior Director of Beneficial Electrification at ICF. I get asked a lot, what does ICF stand for? I think that's sort of the wrong question. I think, what is the impact that ICF makes is probably the right question there. Folks may be familiar with Energy Star. If you look on your refrigerator or things like that, that's a brand that we helped stand up years ago. The Clean Cities Coalitions, back in the early 90s, we were part of the team here that, provided technical support and, implementation experience to get this network built out there. As I kind of come down to ground level, a lot of what I do is work with electric utilities, public and private fleets out there. Some of my partners in the room, Richie Biedenharn with Clico, do a lot of work with him and his team on implementation and providing technical support to fleets out there. Cherie Schmidt, I know you're around here somewhere, in Entergy, Amanda here as well. Work with all the locals here, and I'd say, just to, maybe do a plug for what I think makes the biggest deal, get in touch with your utilities early. I think that really helps, kind of smooth out a lot of the friction points out there. My focus over the last decade plus has really been helping fleets. I think about it in terms of almost like holding the hands of the folks in need, right? So if we can all collectively help identify, what are the needs out there, I can sort of serve as a conduit, a concierge to kind of bring those different, partners together to solve for those needs there. So today we're going to kind of get into a little bit of strategy. I hope this is going to be an interesting conversation. We have a lot of really interesting perspectives. We got national leaders, true national leaders here that have a lot of insights, and I think it's going to be of interest to folks as well. But I want to make sure that we, sort of keep the conversation kind of streamlined and simple as well there. So maybe we can just kind of start, just quick show of hands out there. Who feels pulled in different directions? Maybe it's the information that you're seeing out there. Maybe it's the different kind of imperatives that you see, whether it's costs or emission reductions. I think we're all sort of experiencing that, maybe in our own way a little bit, but, we're all feeling that there. So, what if we just sort of focus on a couple easy questions today? What works? Where does it work? And, maybe like when, the timing elements of that. So the folks here are going to, share their perspectives on some different techniques, strategies, pathways, as we really tackle, the what, when, and where of how we should be thinking about this. So as I mentioned, we got some really cool, panelists with us today. I think you guys are going to enjoy them. Tanzee Silver with TRC. She's got a terrific amount of experience really across the board. She's got a lot of insights on incentives, program design perspectives, really helping us, sort of unlock, advantages that are out there. We got Mike Roeth. You guys heard him yesterday. I thought that was one of my favorite presentations, Mike. The work that you guys are doing over there is just cool. Mike's going to be able to give us sort of that field perspective, right? There's, sort of like a duality that's out there with, the cool ideas and, the excitement and all that. And then there's like the practicality, like what's actually happening out there. And Mike's got that in spades. We also got Dan Gage with the transport project, and I know we talk a lot about electrification and some of the fuels out there, but there is value in diversification of fuels, and Dan's going to be able to share a little bit about the RNG market and deployment, really how we should be thinking about that as a part of our portfolio here in the here and now. So today's session, we're going to try to keep this a little bit fluid. I'm going to pass it around to our panelists here, and I'm going to ask them to do a little bit of an introduction on kind of who they are, and also provide some opening statements on, their perspective on what they're seeing out there, and, what interests them really. Following that, we're going to do a little bit of a fireside chat. We don't have a fireplace here, so I'm going to ask that you guys kind of imagine that it's blue is red, and it's a nice, cozy winter day out here. I know it's a little bit warm, right? But we're going to try to keep this a little bit more of an organic conversation, and I'm going to encourage everybody really to, add insights where they're relevant here. Now, following that, we're going to do a Q&A. So I'd say, if you guys have questions, jot them down. I think questions from you folks are going to be the most meaningful, and we can, see where this fun conversation goes there. So let's go ahead and start with Tanzee. Tanzee, would you mind giving an introduction of yourself and maybe some preliminary thoughts?
Okay. Thanks, Blake. As Blake mentioned, my name is Tanzee Silver, and I'm with TRC's Clean Transportation Solutions Group. And as part of that group, we focus on helping on and off-road fleets understand the technology that's available to them, and then also how that aligns with incentives. Usually lately, when I say the word incentive, everyone usually gives me a sigh. But one thing we are definitely seeing is that there is funding still available, plenty of it. At our last market brief that we released, we estimated it's around $13 billion still available. But the thing that we're seeing is that there's a shift from the federal funding over to the states and to the localities. So that gives a new perspective or even an opportunity, because we see that now the states and the localities are able to structure the incentives to really match what the goals of their region is, as opposed to the federal ones that was kind of a baseline across the board. And another thing with that we really enjoy now is that we really get to sit with our fleets and say, what is your challenges that you already have at your site? What does your timelines look like? How does that overlay with the incentives? And that when we're crafting our incentive applications, we're really focusing on the story of the fleet and how does this technology actually benefits their operations versus just the standard one-size-fits-all. So in the incentive space, we're constantly seeing changes, but we're also we're tracking them, of course, and then we're also adapting to them as well. One of the biggest things that we really talk about with fleets, especially looking at incentives, is planning is key. So I think I'll probably be the one constantly mentioning that during our chat, but really looking at what you need, what your operations are, and how that can align with the incentives or a combination of them.
Oh, I look forward to it. Dan, over to you.
Thanks, Blake. Thanks to Ann and team for having me here again this year. My name is Dan Gage, president of the Transport Project. We are a national trade association based in Washington, D.C., roughly about 200 member companies, organizations, and stakeholders that promote gaseous fuels. So traditionally, that was conventional natural gas. More and more of that is renewable natural gas today, and our members are also working in hydrogen, which is really exciting. We were founded roughly 37 years ago as the Natural Gas Vehicle Coalition and then NGV America. We rebranded last year to sort of reflect sort of this new outlook. And so our members are fleets, they are fuelers, they are fuel producers, they are OEMs, engine makers, sort of everyone in that value chain we bring together for three main purposes. One is advocacy, obviously, and trying to find regulatory certainty, which is always difficult. We also work with our members on technology, safety, best practices. We are the really the national authority on codes and standards and things you should be doing and things you should not be doing if you're running natural gas fleets. And we also do quite a bit of industry engagement, promotion, and networking. We're really fortunate to have worked with some folks in the States, not only the Clean City programs, but people like Susan Shiflett when she was with the Texas Natural Gas Vehicle Alliance and now moved to hydrogen. We have partners in California as well, both on the natural gas side, and we just signed an agreement with the California Hydrogen Business Council. So we're doing things on the ground. We focus more on federal and some state level advocacy, but we are really working and try to do more and more with our partners on the ground like Louisiana Clean Fuels, where that rubber meets the road, and just happy to be here.
Thank you, Dan. Mike, over to you.
Yeah, so Tanzee, we have really boring jackets on. Doesn't it feel like, these guys are rocking the jackets. And
you want to switch seats with me so you're in the net?
Hey, do you want to switch jackets?
I feel like I'm already below these guys.
You didn't get the memo, did you?
Yeah, Mike Roeth with the North American Council for Freight Efficiency. We've been here 16 years. That's 16 years of my 40 years in career in trucking. So I was with Cummins and International before that, and really love this work. I think what we're seeing with a lot of the technologies for better efficiency, productivity, operating at lower costs and with less emissions, this is a great time for them. What we're seeing with Run on Less the last 6 months, and in particularly the last 2 weeks where the run really occurred, is that all these technologies are getting dramatically better really fast. So we call it the messy middle. I think it's getting messier instead of clearer. Our goal is to put some clarity, particularly into the Class 8, both regional haul, return to base, and long haul over the road, put some clarity to that, and I'm not sure we're there. I think it's getting more challenging, which is kind of a good thing. Choice is good. And all these fleets are different in different regions, like you mentioned, Blake. Some will work. Some of these technologies will work better. And it's now figuring out what works for you and getting really smart about how you adopt the right thing for your business.
Well, let's maybe build on that messy middle. I remember that slide you had yesterday, Mike, the one that had the bridge that's kind of spanned a little bit of a time zone. And it was really interesting to me as I kind of saw the pathway, and I know that there's some kind of assumptions and conclusions in there, but there's a diversification of fuel, and I think that really goes to the point. Now, as we think about that messy middle, I think what I feel a little bit is a little bit of uncertainty that's out there. There's so much that's changing. Every day I look at the news, and I feel like there's something more that I need to add, into the calculus of the decision-making process. So I'm going to ask the panelists maybe to kind of build on this and provide some thoughts. Mike, maybe we can start with you with kind of, some of your learnings with the run on less there. Where does your mind go, if someone was to ask, what should fleets be thinking about right now?
Yeah. So the messy middle, all good ideas start on a bar napkin, or at least they do in my world, it seems like. So we sat around, we were starting to do our work on heavy duty, regional haul, electric tractors, and it dawned on us that this was going to be messy. Getting electricity to the depots and to truck stops to charge these trucks was going to be really tough. We saw that. This was 8 years ago, and we saw that. And so we said, okay, well, but also along the way we were learning that we do think the future is, very zero emission related, which would be, electric from renewable electric energy, maybe, renewable hydrogen, or even some of these fuels we're going to talk about. But it was going to be messy getting there, and I think here we are 7-8 years later, and that bridge graphic still works, and so forth. But I do remember in the early days, I was very cautious to call it a messy middle. I said, people don't want to be in a mess. It's not a good thing, right? We don't want our houses to be messy, our garage to be messy. It's just not fun to be in. But it's an accurate portrayal of where we are, and some of it is real. Around these new technologies and limits on range and limits on fuel availability and all kinds of things. But also every mess has its opportunity. And so, I said it yesterday, we enjoyed diesel fuel and diesel energy for almost 100 years moving freight. And now we're turning to these alternatives. But it's just not about the alternatives. The one thing I will say that I keep learning is good old boring efficiency, maybe like this blue and green jacket, is really powerful. So, idle reduction, best tires, aerodynamics, all those things that don't get a lot of attention. You don't see the trucking magazines talking about them, but it's super important. And so with the run, we had 2 trucks do 11.6 mile per gallon. People don't, that's like unheard of numbers. But it's real freight, real routes, real truckers. Now these guys, it was two guys that drove those 2 trucks in the run. They're like driver savants, and that helps. Not everybody can shoot a basketball like Michael Jordan, but they also used a lot of technologies to get it done. So it's a wide range of options that we're working on, Blake, and there's opportunity all over the place. Some of them might be bunts and singles. My Reds lost last night, so I should stop using baseball analogies. But it's bunts and signals and stolen bases, along with some home runs, and they're different in different parts of the country. But it's exciting times, but a little bit scary and messy. But I do think our industry's built for this. We now have data that can help us do it and figure it out, and we're much more capable of dealing with these alternatives today than we were, and they're better than we were 20 years ago, let's say.
Yeah, so it seems like, the first step in trying to address the messy middle is how do we get on base, right? And as I think about that, I think about, leveraging the incentives that might be out there. So Tanzee, maybe you can kind of give us a little bit of kind of a deeper dive. You mentioned that there is a lot of funding out there. The ability to assess it, access it, et cetera, there might be a little bit challenging, but can you maybe provide a little bit of perspective there? as fleets are thinking about how to address this messy middle there, how should they be thinking about incentives?
I think the first thing that I always mention is planning. And planning really includes thinking about what the goals of your fleet are. One, it kind of helps you navigate that messy middle of understanding what technology would work best for you in certain situations. And then from there, we can align that to incentives. Sometimes you'll have fleets that's like, I just want to go battery electric, but then you find out that their route range is much longer than a battery electric vehicle available in their classification. So really thinking about what your goals are, looking at what your operations are, and then overlaying it to the incentive landscape and being able to see what's available, whether it's federal, in your local region, and also with your utilities. A lot of these incentives and grant programs are actually stackable. So we look at this entire gambit of funding and how it aligns with your program. The other big one is fleets tend to ignore Make Ready. Make Ready is a great tool in your arsenal. It helps spread out the funding. It also gives you more opportunities to apply for funding and still meet your overall goals as well. So looking at the entire space of your supply or your infrastructure, your vehicles and equipment, and then how those can fit into incentives is always a great way to approach this big, messy space.
So thanks, Tanzee. So we're on base. We got some folks that are in position to score. I didn't play baseball, so I'm having trouble with this analogy here. But we're trying to send somebody around to home plate, right? So Dan, maybe you can kind of talk about that. I think about it in terms of kind of quick wins. The levers that we can pull, to really cross the finish line. Can you maybe talk about some of the other technologies that are out there, RNG, and how to really think about kind of the near term there?
Yeah, thanks. So we're seeing a lot of fleets that have maybe tested natural gas in the past years go all in. And part of that is for a couple of reasons. One is the cost. So typically natural gas at the pump will run you, and depends on the region of the country, anywhere from 75 cents to $1.50 a gallon less. So the fuel costs up front are considerably lower. And again, it depends on your contract if you're paying retail. But if you follow the AFDC website that Ann referenced earlier, you'll see that every quarter it's usually there's considerable savings there on fuel. So right, form follows financing. In freight movement, it's very high volumes, very low margins. So next to labor, fuel is their big cost. Fuel's key. The incremental cost on natural gas trucks is lowering, and that's important, the incremental over diesel. So yes, there's some upfront costs. There are a lot of grant programs that are available. We're seeing a lot of interest still in refuse. 2/3 of all refuse new builds are natural gas. We're still seeing interest in transit, a lot of reinvestment in transit where they tested electric and running electric on certain routes, but they need a workhorse still until potentially that full ZEV hydrogen product is available and affordable. And then in the over-the-road movement with the addition of a 15-liter Cummins truck engine, we're seeing a lot of interest from middle mile. So I think that's what we're seeing with our big fleets that we represent, UPS, WM, Walmart, PepsiCo, Amazon. They're using natural gas for that warehouse-to-warehouse move, middle mile, and then bringing in all these other technologies that are maybe a little bit more available today for that last mile delivery. The challenge we have in all this is what Ann was talking about, right? If you're a big fleet, you want to control that, not only the fuel cost, but you want to control access, availability, those redundancies of fuel. So those natural gas fleets that tested it and tried it have brought that fueling in-house behind the fence. And what does that do? And creates new challenges for us in our industry as we try to work with smaller or medium-sized fleets that are maybe in that light-duty work truck space, or you have a fleet of, say, 20 delivery vans or class Class 6 box trucks, how do we work to support them? And we have a lot of different members across the country that are trying to solve those challenges. We've got some fuelers here, we've got some work truck folks here, all in that space, and then we've got companies like Hexagon Agility. They're working the fuel systems, all anywhere from class 2 through 8. So the beauty about natural gas is that we have a proven, dedicated, available product today. It's just having fleets understand how they can incorporate some of those into their broader plans, right? Sometimes they'll want to be in a neighborhood completely zero emission and not just zero emission equivalent, but there's options out there that will help, in that whole middle as we figure out that transition. We've got some really unique technologies and really unique fueling opportunities.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I mean, it feels like, there's a little bit of crystallization happening, at least in my mind here. That messy is starting to feel a little bit more organized here. At least that's kind of the impression that I'm picking up here. I think there are ways for us to be thinking about these things, right? The decomplicate. But something that Dan said kind of struck out to me. Form follows finances, if I heard that correctly. I really like that idea. I recall starting, working with Entergy here, Amanda and Cherie and her team about 11 years ago in this local market as we started really pushing the narrative of, clean energy there. And, I think the vibe that, I initially, heard from the public was, if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense, and we can't really lose track. I know a lot of times we get very passionate, maybe even emotional about clean energy out there, but we need to, I think, be grounded in a sense of the economics of it. So maybe we could talk about that for a minute. There's a lot of change that's happening out there as we think about, the incentives, as we think about things like tariffs that are out there, fuel costs, rates. I feel like every time I leave the house, I drop $40. Things are just getting more expensive, right? So maybe we can kind of talk about that, and we can, get some perspective from the panelists. Tanzee, let's start with you there. You talked about the idea of sort of like stacking incentives, and, really that's predicated on, a foundation of planning, right? Can you maybe kind of build out some thoughts on that? How do we close the gap? How should folks be maybe thinking about the economics here in this kind of near term?
That's a really challenging piece. Well, first, I think it's important that everyone understands incentives are not only grants. A lot of times we'll meet with clients who are trying to figure out this financial model, and they're like, okay, we're going to get all grant money. And it's like, but you're looking for maybe $25, $30 million right now. So incentives is a combination of grants, rebates, low to zero cost loans. These are done sometimes through green banks or federal government or even states. So using all of the incentive opportunities, especially for really, really, really large scale projects, is key. The other piece is, and that comes back to that planning of trying to kind of approach your project in small bites so that you can do incentives over years. A lot of incentives come back quarterly, some come back biannually, others come back yearly, some come back every 3 or 4 years. So if you have a very long scale project and you're trying to turn over a really large fleet, you can actually kind of schedule when you're going to go after incentives and fill in that gap between your ROI. Other pieces is really looking at when your fleet is aging out. So if you know that you have trucks that are, whether it's trucks or even off-road equipment that's approaching its end of useful life, but you have others that are not ready to transition, not necessarily forcing a quicker transition just because. Sometimes it helps to spread that out and then be able to help recoup some costs. Overall, it's also operational costs that you save as well, and not forgetting those. We've found with a lot of the technology, maintenance costs have gone down, and also training of staff can actually extend the useful life of a lot of the equipment. So making sure that you have a good operation and maintenance plan along with it could really help back with that ROI.
I'm going to have Dan go next here. As I think about like natural gas, I think that there's a sense of stability, right, with some of the fuel costs. Like there's opportunities to leverage stability where you find it, right? I also think about some of the credits that might be out there, as we think about, maybe the per cost per mile there. But Dan, can you maybe give your perspective on, total cost of ownership, how we should be thinking about the fuel cost element of it?
Yeah, I think, build on what Tanzee just mentioned, we have not been fortunate to have huge federal largesse of grant money for technology. The previous administration, had a different focus. And I'm not sure that's going to come back for many of these technologies for the next several years. But Tanzee's right. We have members, you work with one of our biggest members, WM, to find those types of grants in these regional. So there is money out there for the vehicle, but I think when you look at natural gas, you also have to consider the fuel. So we're part of the EPA's renewable fuel standard, right? There's funding the sale of renewable natural gas RINs. And so I think everyone here understands what renewable natural gas is compared to conventional natural gas. But if you're in the renewable system, right, every production of a molecule creates this RIN. That helps subsidize the cost of that, right? It monetizes that gas if it's used for transportation purpose. So there's, other than the typical cost stability that you have with cost stability that you have with natural gas, right? We don't fluctuate because that commodity cost is always about the same compared to, ups and downs with diesel and other petroleum-based products. We have that stability. When you add in the RFS, that monetizes that renewable molecule. And if you're selling that gas in a state and dispensing it in a state with a clean fuel standard, and right now that's California, Oregon, Washington, soon to be New Mexico, you can stack that on top. So, we work with some fleets that have privately told me they're spending, about 49 cents a gallon on their fuel costs. And when you're running, like a company like UPS is running 150 million gallons of natural gas a year, that's really considerable savings that helps bring down that total cost of ownership. There's also, as Tanzee mentioned, a different maintenance schedule with natural gas because it runs so clean. You don't have the cycle, the spark plug changes that you would if you were running a traditional diesel truck. On top of that, because it burns so clean, in terms of NOx and SOx and no diesel particulate matter, we don't have these really onerous diesel emission systems on those vehicles. So when you take all of that maintenance out over time, you really can get a cool return on your investment. We'd like it to be more like 18, 24 months, but it all depends on, number of trucks you're running, where you're going. But if you've got a fixed route, if you've got a return to base application, you really can't beat natural gas for being that heavy-duty workhorse.
Thanks, Dan. And I don't know if this is going to cut out. I turned it on and off, so we'll see if it works here. So far, so good, right? Mike, one of the funny, maybe, I don't know if that's the right term, observations that I'll make. My company, we track probably about 600 different clean energy vehicles, right? And we use that in terms of being able to crunch numbers for folks out there. But there seems to be a little bit of a dichotomy between like what's on the nameplate, and what's on the marketing materials and what happens in real life. And I think part of the run on less, the value of it is we can see the stuff play out like real, Can you provide some maybe perspectives from your perspective as it relates to the economics?
Yeah, these solutions get better over time. And so in the early days, well, let's just use natural gas. 15 years ago, we had a 9-liter engine trying to do at least a 12-liter job or maybe a 15-liter job. Now we've got an engine that's proving to be incredibly efficient, lower weight in the new 15-liter. We also, not only do the solutions get better over time, but the users start to apply them better. They figure out, like what's our strategy? Dan, you just talked about return to base and more predictable routes. They figure out the best place to use the technology. So over time, these things just naturally get better. On electric trucks in 2021, with our first run on less electric, those heavy tractors, were 150-mile trucks that took like 5 hours to charge. In the run we just finished, we had one battery electric truck do 465 miles on a single charge, and it took less than an hour and a half to go from 0 to 100% charge, and really only 45 minutes to go from 20 to 80%. So things get better, is my point. And so as manufacturers, and I guess I'd challenge you all to, not oversell your stuff, don't undersell it. but really work with the fleets on the reality of what your solution is, because that's really important. And we see it all the time. Startup companies. The truck I just talked about was a Tesla. We also had a Windrose, very nascent new vehicles. They're not even almost not even out of investor startup mode. So there's a lot of research that says that entrepreneurs oversell their stuff to be able to get out of the labs and into the real world. And then there's this point where they got to convince customers in the real world to use it. And there's like this academic thing that says they overpromise by 9 times. And then, once it gets out in the real world. So you have to flex and move quickly there. So I think, we all look at the promises made by the manufacturers as to what place they are in the market and where they're going. We got to think too about, like we did with natural gas, what if we had this and what if we had that? And I think the game changer really with, Dan, you talked about the engine, you talked about fueling availability and cost and so forth, but the fact that so much of the fuel is renewable natural gas is really maybe the key game changer for natural gas right now. So, how that emerges with all these solutions over time will be interesting, but just having a real pragmatic understanding of not just the fleets that are adopting these, but the whole supply chain as well, will go a long way to help move these things forward.
And if I could just add on that, Mike just mentioned renewable natural gas. Last year, we were at 86% of all natural gas motor fuel dispensed nationally was renewable, from a renewable source. And I think unlike renewable diesel or biodiesel, you don't have to be next door to a renewable diesel plant to get it, right? It's a system of just like putting $100 in the bank in New York, and then I fly to New Orleans and I got to get $100 out of the cashier or the ATM. It's still my $100, but it's not the same $100 bill that I put in there. So as this renewable natural gas gets injected into the pipeline, right, it has to be tracked for the RIN, for the Clean Fuel Standard credit, if there is one, where it comes out at the end user. And so we know that 86% of all natural gas last year was renewable. That's a big thing, right? We're making that, we're decarbonizing the entire natural gas system. And I think that's important, not just for transportation use, but it really supports states like Louisiana that have, large geologic or conventional natural gas production.
It matters in a lot of ways, even including the concern that comes up about leakage. Well, if you're leaking conventional natural gas, that's one thing, but renewable natural gas was already out, and it was leaking anyway.
Yeah, we're capturing or harvesting a short-term climate pollutant anyway, so it's something we should be doing, right? And then repurposing it, it's taking a waste liability and repurposing it for a green energy asset to displace something that's worse, right? And in this case, it's traditional diesel.
Well, maybe we can build off that. As I hear that, I think one of the narratives that Richie Biedenhardt and I were pushing for years and years now has been this idea of cleaner, cheaper, and easier. We talked about the economics aspect of it. Maybe we can kind of continue the conversation a little bit on the on the cleaner aspect of it. And I think what I'm hearing here is really having the foresight to measure, but really understand what to measure helps really tell the story of the progress that we're all making there. Dan, you talked a little bit about kind of the the life cycle benefits and being able to really capture, important aspects like the percentage of renewable there. Can you maybe build out some thoughts on that a little bit more as you think about kind of the pathways, and you think about, kind of how to document those life cycles? How should folks be thinking about that?
Yeah, so, the California Air Resources Board does a really, really good job of tracking, and they have to, right, for the LCFS program, but tracking every pathway for every molecule, in essence, that could potentially be dispensed in the state. So they track that, and they create it from all of the different production sources that might come in and come into the state. And the last year, the total bio-CNG mix was a negative 194 carbon intensity. So that means that if you're a fleet that's running natural gas and pulling it out or fueling with natural gas that's dispensed in that state, you're running carbon negative today. So it sort of, goes back to what Mike and Tanzee were sort of talking about, this messy middle and trying to figure out what to do. we've all been taught that early investment compounds future progress, right? So the more we can do now today with an RNG truck to get those dirty diesel trucks that are on the road off, the more we do to compound, those carbon benefits later on. I think with natural gas, there's some unique perspectives of folks who maybe tried it years ago and it didn't quite work. But we've been through that ringer, and we've got a really mature, proven technology, and not just on the really high upper end, but when you talk about the gaseous fuel products that are made by traditional manufacturers like GM and Ford, we've got some gaseous prep trucks that are available to go today. The fuel is available, and you don't have to wait for the utility, or you still have to plan, right? Tanzee's right. Even if you're in natural gas, you got to make sure the truck is spec'd right, you know what range you have, where you're going to get your fuel, who you're going to work with on that, how you're going to contract for it. It's important training, right? It's a different cycle. It's you've got to have not just the folks who are fueling the vehicle, but driving the vehicle and maybe maintaining the vehicle, all trained on the differences of using a gaseous fuel. So there's that training out there, but if you're in a community where natural gas is plentiful, it's available, and it's really scalable. And I think I've been in this job now for 8 years, Blake, and early on I was thinking, well, gosh, people got to be doing this just for the economic benefit, right, the fuel savings. Then we saw folks really, really concerned about carbon and investment, right? We were talking about, I don't want to say DEI, but we were talking about, oh gosh, it's escaping me, but all these investment focuses that had to be on, is it clean, is it sustainable? And so a lot of the big companies were looking, like Amazon made a big pledge that they were going to be carbon neutral by a certain date. So that was the impetus for investment. I think we've come back now, and we are sort of in this space where folks want to do what they can when they can, but cost is still important. And but everyone has a better understanding of criteria pollutant and certainly decarbonization purposes too.
Yeah, Mike, I keep plugging yesterday's presentation you gave. Maybe I should have moderated that presentation, I don't know. But, one of the interesting things in the presentation is you seem to have a common yardstick for the different fuels that are out there, whether you're looking at like MPGs or, per ton per mile, something like that. Can you maybe kind of think about, help us understand a little bit of how to think about these different type of fuels with kind of a commonality to them?
Yeah, great question. It's not easy as we look at how to compare and contrast the different technologies. Ultimately, that's what the fleets are going to do. Well, you can come with me to Denver. I'm doing the same thing next week if you want to. We think about it in three ways. One, sort of an operational comparison. I mean, we got to admit, we've got diesel trucks doing this work today. So how do the diesel trucks? So what is the, range? What is the cost per gallon? What's the, capability of the truck to do the over miles? So it's capability of the truck to do the job compared to diesel or even gasoline in the smaller classes. And then secondly, it's the TCO financial comparison between the technologies. And this is where it gets incredibly difficult because, first of all, we're no longer just comparing, two tires to what their MPG on diesel trucks are. We're comparing, the fueling, the infrastructure to fuel or charge, the cost of the trucks themselves. Even things like, do drivers want to drive the truck or not? We're seeing, with some of these technologies, they really love the battery electric trucks, for instance. So what does that mean financially to a fleet? So, and also for some of these technologies, like I just said before, they're very nascent and early. So where's their cost going to be down the road? The current battery electric day cab tractor is $425,000. I don't think it'll stay there. I think that will come down over time. Somewhat. So it's predicting the total cost. And then the third thing is just classic availability. Can I get this vehicle? Can I get the fuel? Can I get it near me or where I need to have it and so forth? And I think your comment, Dan, around you can really source RNG and not have that $100 be your $100. That's pretty interesting. I think our thought is you compare it in those three ways, and that's what we're going to do over the next 6 months with the data from these 13 trucks. Is we're going to take all this data and we're going to look at how did they do operationally against one another, total cost of ownership against one another, and thinking about maturity of that product and the decision making by the fleets around that TCO, and then finally availability and also the carbon footprint that each of the solutions take, because that's not important to everyone, but it will be important to a lot of people, and it's really important today as you might haul freight for some of these companies that are really asking, okay, what's the carbon intensity of a biodiesel, renewable diesel, renewable natural gas, battery electric, depending on how the electricity is produced, on and on and on.
One of the challenges for us is that as these big fleets, or not just big fleets, but we represent, for instance, a company in Florida, City Furniture. All of their delivery box trucks are run on natural gas. But the challenge that we have are these fleets that are running natural gas, they love it. And so they keep that truck for the life of the vehicle. They're running it for 12, 15 years. So we don't really have this secondary or tertiary market and that residual value. And I think that's a challenge for us as an industry. Love to hear your thoughts on that, right? Because I think that's going to be the challenge too for electric and potentially hydrogen, is that folks make that investment when they reach that TCO or they reach that, that return on that investment, they want to keep it and get every cent they can out of it. And so if we're talking about convincing that over-the-road freight, those folks that are buying trucks every 3 or 4 years, how do we make this alternative fuel world work for them when we don't know what the residual value of the vehicle is going to be when it's all done? I don't know. That's a big challenge.
Yes, definitely. A lot of the newer technology hasn't aged out yet, so we really don't know. Another big piece too is we talked a lot about on-road, but off-road has a very big impact as well to the whole transportation system. Once that truck arrives, we either have to get it on a plane or get it off a boat or get it to someone. So understanding how all of these different groups can actually start working together and sharing their infrastructure is a really big piece as well, that we're starting to see slowly different groups working together to supply infrastructure or shared infrastructure across all of the different types of alternative fuels. And another big one, and I think both guys would agree, the requirements or regulations in the area really do matter. Some areas require that you have to focus on a certain type of emissions. And this also kind of runs back into that incentive space where one area will look more at PM 2.5 and say, well, we want to decide which technology works best for our region based off of the cost per ton avoided. So thinking about that grant space and what your operations are, kind of finding that middle balance between operations, the funding, and what the region is also looking for really comes into play when choosing these different types of technologies.
So I'm a small fleet. I only got 10 vehicles, right? But I'm interested in the idea of a grant or some sort of incentive. I understand that we're going to have to crunch some numbers here, but I just don't have a staff member to do it. All right, we're busy. We're all fully loaded jobs. I mean, frankly, we should hire more people just to do our operations. How should I go about, trying to find support in a cost-effective way, to be able to navigate, be able to, capture, the right measurements out there and be able to, be compliant maybe with some of these grants. Do you have any ideas there, Tanzee, on, resources that might be out there for me?
Well, one, of course, TRC. My group, that is one of the main things we do. We don't only focus on the largest fleets, like earlier we mentioned, Waste Management is one of our clients, but along with that, we work from the small mom and pop group all the way through the large, huge global organization. So one is always an opportunity to work with someone who can actually help plan out your fleet transition and then help you line them up with incentives. We have programs where we just share the information of just saying, hey, this is a list of all the grants in your region, and you can receive it monthly. Or you can actually have a direct person that works just solely for your fleet. Along with us, there's lot of clean cities organizations throughout the country where you can work with sometimes their staff to kind of help you navigate understanding what the region's requirements are. Also, within your utility companies as well, they also offer advisors and guidance and support. Then if you choose to go at it alone, which is fine as well, there is a lot of resources too. So I know for TRC, we actually release the Sustainable Fleet Brief or Market Brief every single year. It's free, you download it, and it'll give you information on what other fleets are doing based off of the surveys that we've taken, what's happening on the incentive landscape, where we think the projections are going, and you can actually see it, the changes over time. And there's a lot of nonprofit groups as well. They're also regional, so I won't run down a list of names, but if you see me and you want to know one specifically, I probably can tell you that there's a lot of nonprofit groups that will work with smaller fleets to help them be able to navigate the incentive space and the regulatory space that they might be in.
So, I think one of the things I'm hearing a lot is it's not an all or nothing, right? It's not, all natural gas fleet. It's not all electric. It's not all anything. It's a combination. It's a strategic mindset of really utilizing the technologies that hit, particular use cases and help you accomplish the objectives that you may have on different time frames, near term, long term, whatever it may be there. So maybe we can kind of get some of the perspective of the panelists here on, that idea of like a portfolio type strategy versus, I guess, a lunatic mindset, all for one. I don't know how I would characterize that, but, a single fuel type mindset there. Mike, I think that your presentation the other day definitely illustrated the idea of mixed fuels there. Can you maybe provide some thoughts on kind of how to think about your fleet in a mixed tech type perspective there?
Yeah, it's so easy to say the future is all these fuels and all these things, but it's going to be limited. I mean, there will be a point here. Let me try to, and I think we're starting to approach that. If you look at like the truck OEMs and they're trying to figure out what are they going to offer, and they think about, okay, I need to offer diesel because it's still I got to pay the bills and got to do it, so I got to offer diesel. What considerations should I have around biodiesel or renewable diesel? Do I offer the 15-liter natural gas or not? How do I lean in on battery electric and hydrogen engines and hybrids and boom, 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 boom? Well, we don't have a huge market. In Class 8, we only build 250,000 a year, and I said yesterday 25% of those are vocational trucks, and so now heavy tractors, now you're well under 200,000 a year for heavy tractors, and now you got all these, used to be all diesel or kind of almost are. What if we have all these? You just run out of engineers and money and time, and salesmen can't sell all the different solutions. So we are going to hit maybe a too much point. And so I think, so what do we do about that? I think that, if you're a Freightliner lover and they don't offer something, you may need to think about changing truck OEMs in order to get the solution you want and those sort of things. So I think that is something to watch out for, because I think it's real and it's not, and it will occur over time. So some of these, one of the things with run on less messy metal, I was curious, would we find that some of these solutions just are not that good? Maybe we'll get less messy because some will just fall away. We're actually not seeing that at all. We're seeing them all get better. And then it's a question of how do I get them as a fleet? How do I get the fueling or the charging? And there's a lot here. It's just not as simple as let's do it all and everything will be, unicorns and rainbows. This will be challenging.
Yeah. That's what we need the partners for. Tanzee, any thoughts here? And I'd like to maybe keep the final remarks here pretty brief here so we can open for Q&As. But any thoughts from your research and analytics out there on maybe how to think about the different technologies that are available for folks?
Yes, I am definitely an advocate for not doing all of them at the same time unless you have a really, really, really large fleet. One of the biggest things that we tend to forget about is space. So sometimes your site won't be able to accommodate every single type, or there might be one or two that is really, really the best fit for you. And being able to focus on that and what your operational needs are always should help kind of be that guiding light through which fuels is best for you. The other is regional. What is the regional regulations around you? And then also, what is the cost to operate under that type of, or with that type of fuel? When you look at kind of all three of those pieces at the same time, it kind of helps kind of streamline which ones you really should lean towards. And then, of course, also your utility rates and things like that, too, would also help you navigate that.
Dan, any thoughts there on the idea of kind of a portfolio level strategy?
Yeah, I was mentioning before, and Ann mentioned it with her chart about public fleet. I mean, one of the biggest challenges we have is keeping those public stations open, because so many fleets that are investing in natural gas are bringing that behind the fence. There are applications and opportunities to do it for all size fleets, right? You don't need to build a $2 million station for 2 or 3 trucks. There's appliances, there are things that you can do it sort of at home, right, or a small fleet now. So just keeping that open is the public access is a real challenge for us. It's one that I worry about and I think about. But on the flip side, if you're looking at the AFTD and you're looking at the number of stations that are available or that are out there, we're upwards of over 1,600. I love the idea that a lot of our members that have a, say, middle mile component are also now using that natural gas that's coming in the facility to create a microgrid to charge their last mile delivery because of either cost or unavailability of the electric that they need. So we're seeing some of our fleet members doing things in electric, but using natural gas to power them, and that's exciting.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up and thank our panelists very much. Dan, Tanzee, Mike, you guys are so helpful, and your voices are very much appreciated, and your leadership. I encourage folks to grab our panelists here, ask them all those other burning questions we didn't get time for. And just finally here, I want to kind of acknowledge the obvious here. Now is the time that we all need to come together. As we think about, some of the uncertainty that's out there, it's the forces like the Clean Cities coalitions that are keeping us all tight. There's no more important time to support your Clean Cities coalitions than right now. Please, take a few minutes, get in touch with Ann, ask her how you can support her, knowing that a rising tide raises all ships out there.